That's right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. Today we're discussing the must-have streamers, breaking down the key QBs and tight ends that can help you make your fantasy playoff run and lead you to a fantasy title. Breaking down weeks 15, 16, and 17. All this and more starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. A lot of enthusiasm in the middle of the week. And once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco, and I am joined once again by the greatest pinch hitter of all time. It's Dave Cruz. You can follow him at Cruiser128 on Twitter. Dave, what's going on, man?
I'll show my name, man. I am the Manny Mota of Razzball.
Okay. So, all right. So don't know what that's a really good designated hitter.
If you know if you know who Manny Mota is, you're a lot older than you look.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. So the good news is I feel young. You make me feel young. I love that about you, Dave. Honestly, the fact that you give me these references and I have no idea. Honestly, you could probably tell me a current baseball player would not have a clue outside of a handful of guys. So it is okay. I think Shohei Ohtani plays on every team. That's what I think, all right, at this point. But anyway, enough baseball talk. Let's get into some football talk. And by the way, if you like football talk, I recommend you subscribe to the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel because every Sunday we do a Sunday live start-sit show for 2 hours before kickoff. We break down all your start-sit questions live on YouTube. And on top of that, we also do a live injury report and also a weather report. So that's really important this time of year, getting all the latest updated information to help you set your lineups and win your fantasy championships. However, today's show, folks, we're going to be talking about some playoff previews. Once again, if you haven't checked out our series so far on Razzball, we've been breaking down some fun topics to help you in your playoff push, to help you win your fantasy title. And today we're going to be talking about must-have streamers. That's right. We're going to be talking about the key quarterback and tight end streamers you can pick up on your waivers right now, potentially, that can help you win your fantasy title. Now, Dave, I asked you to dive into the lab, figure out who your ideal streamers are. Before we get into individual weeks and talking about which matchups we're kind of attacking, do you have an ideal? Let's start with quarterbacks. Do you have an ideal QB streamer for the playoff run?
Yeah, there's a few guys I wouldn't hesitate to actually not only stream but just grab as maybe a replacement. They're good enough against all teams that they can sustain you in lieu of other guys. So the kind of guys I'm thinking of is Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's 10th in points per game for the year. He hasn't played all year, but he's averaging over 21 points per game in 6-point TD leagues. Schedule isn't awesome, but it's certainly serviceable. Another guy that's been hammered, and he's probably available in a lot less leagues, is Bo Nix at 65%. He's since week 4, he's been 5th in quarterback scoring. And the schedule, again, it's not great, but it's not bad. The only danger I find with him is, we built kind of our Bo Nix opinion on the fact that he's a mobile quarterback. Well, last few weeks, the running has dried up. He hasn't had more than five yards in rushing in a week in 4 or 5 weeks. Another guy is one that Max Styles has been pounding on for weeks, Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston's still owned in under 30 weeks. He's the kind of the craps roll of quarterbacks. You could get snake eyes, you could get 7. He's got a couple in the last 5 games that he started. He's got 2 games with 13.5 points or less, and 3 with more than 29.5 points, including Monday night where he just exploded for nearly 500 yards. Again, I don't worry about starting him against anybody, but I know there's a risk there. There's a downside. And probably the last guy I would say out of the guys I looked at is Anthony Richardson, who's still only owned in 58% of leagues, but he's averaged almost 21.5 points since he got the starting job back. And he's got 93 rushing yards in 3 games. The schedule's a little bit glitchy, but he's got Denver in week 15 and then Tennessee and the Giants in 16 and 17. To me, he's at least a streamer for week 16.
Yeah, so the first one I think that really stood out is Herbert. I feel like I had higher expectations, and obviously the Atlanta game last week was a big-time disappointment. I think it mostly has to do with the fact that the Falcons didn't show up at all offensively, and so they didn't really have to do much. Now, he's got a home game against the Bucs, and I think in week 15, that it doesn't really get much better of a spot. He's at home in the Dome playing against Tampa, and the good thing is I feel like the Bucs are a good enough offense. That's the kind of offensive game where both sides can move the ball, both sides can score touchdowns, and I feel like that's a game where Herbert can really push kind of similar to the Cincinnati Bengals game they had a few weeks ago. Winston, on the other hand, no, go ahead.
Yeah, to me, Herbert at this point has kind of fallen into the streamer. 3 weeks ago, I was super high on Herbert because I looked at his schedule and I go, this guy's got one of the best schedules for quarterbacks down the stretch. But like you said, he had a tough game against Atlanta, and the week before, I don't remember who the opponent was, but he scored
Ravens.
Yeah, so he had a tough game against the Ravens as well. And they basically, it's all of a sudden they went through about 5 games where they were throwing a ton. And the last 2 games, it's been more, they haven't been running as many plays. So that kind of presents a problem for them.
And honestly, the irony is the opposite for Winston, right? I mean, the one thing that you worry about with Jameis is that he's going to be playing in the Northeast or Midwest, if you will. Sorry, Cleveland people. My apologies. But he's playing in Cleveland and Cincinnati and Cleveland. And so the weather could be a huge question mark. The matchup can be great, but as soon as that weather comes in and you're dealing with that Cleveland weather, it doesn't matter anymore. So you're kind of running – I think Jameis is in against the Chiefs, Bengals, and Dolphins, as long as the weather is somewhat normal, even 35 degrees, light wind, but nothing crazy. Like, I'm confident because all 3 of those offenses are elite. All 3 of those defenses are beatable in the pass game, especially as of late. Like, the Chiefs defense, by the way, in the passing game especially, just hasn't looked the same. I mean, Aiden O'Connell went off against them. And you look at the Dolphins, early on in the season they dominated, but now recently they haven't been as dominant. So, like, the Bengals are just absurd. You just watch what Russ did to them. And so you're looking at a schedule where, honestly, if you're the 6th seed in your league, Winston is the type of guy who could get you to beat better teams. Like, he could drop 30 and 40 points and 6 point per passing touchdown. So, like, that's 100%. Kind of the upside swing. 100%. Yeah. Another guy similar to that is like Will Levis. And Levis has the Bengals at the Colts, which isn't as interesting, but at the Jags too. I don't think I would trust Will Levis in my playoff stretch. Maybe in super flex, but not really in this. But like, I think the more conservative one would probably be Derek Carr. And Carr has been solid this season, but the issue with Carr is that he just keeps losing weapons. And like at a certain point, it's like he doesn't have – maybe he gets Olave back, maybe. But Rashid Shaheed, no Taysom Hill now. And it just gets to a point where you're like, I like Derek Carr. But, when it comes to the fantasy playoffs, he doesn't have elite talent around him. I don't know if I feel comfortable. So I think really it comes down to Winston's my number 1. Herbert's my number 2 here. But overall, I think that when you're coming to streamer, it's going to be matchup dependent, of course. And that's why we're going to break it down by each week. But before we do that, let's talk tight ends for a second. Just give me like 1 or 2 names that stood out to you. What were the number 1 and number 2 tight ends that stood out that are potential streamers for the playoff run?
Well, one thing I noticed that since Jake Ferguson has missed a couple of games with a concussion, his ownership level has fallen down to about 63% on Yahoo. And to me, he was lit up, by the way, Dave.
He was just dropped. He was just dropped in one of my 10-team leagues. So when you said that, I was like, I just saw it. And I was like, interesting. I kind of like it.
And he's got Carolina in week 15 and Tampa Bay in week 16. I mean, talk about 2 prime matchups. And that you don't even really, at that point, you're not even looking at him in week 14. But it sounds like he's on his way back this week. And I've got to think he'll definitely be back by next week. So there's a guy I would consider. I mean, I know Cooper Rush is the quarterback, but I think Luke Schoonmaker's done pretty well in Ferguson's absence. And I think that would be a guy that Rush would probably lean on quite a bit. And another guy I like that is much lower owned is Zach Ertz. I mean, the last 3 games he's had a touchdown. He's been getting a bunch of targets in the last few weeks. The schedule's kind of cheeks, but the last 3 games that he's had have been against top 10 defenses, or top 12 at least. And that's a guy I wouldn't hesitate to throw into my lineup at any time. So those are the 2 that stuck out to me the most.
So one of the names that I do want to monitor a little bit is Juwan Johnson. I think he's a name that's going to be universally not owned, and the Taysom Hill news is going to put him onto the field a little more. I know Hill kind of plays this hybrid role, but his main role was tight end, and I think Juwan Johnson could benefit. He's got really good matchups in the latter half of the playoffs. The Packers and the Raiders are both winnable matchups for tight ends this season. So that's something I'm looking out for, too, to see how he kind of plays without Taysom Hill in the lineup. And then Will Dissly, is another guy that I think we both agree on, where the Bucs, Broncos, and Patriots, the game in New England, I don't know if I'm excited to really play the Chargers in New England as a whole, like all those guys. But at the same time, the matchups are there for him. And I know last week, was terrible. It was bad for all the pass catchers for the Chargers. It just was one of the games where Kirk Cousins throws 4 interceptions and they score a defensive touchdown.
The offense didn't need to do much, right?
No, it was brutal.
And on top of that, even with 4 turnovers, the Chargers only scored 17 points. There weren't a lot of opportunities there. I think when they play Tampa Bay in Week 15, I think they're going to have to score some points. And to score some points, they're going to have to throw the ball. And I think that's a foreign game for Disney.
Yeah, and let's get into it now. Let's talk Week 15 QB and tight end streamers. Because honestly, my opinion is, based on the research I've done, there's probably not going to be one guy you're going to be able to pick up and stream every week. So it might be, if you've been struggling with your quarterback situation or tight end, this is the time of year to pick up 2 of them and just play them throughout the playoffs. And honestly, the good news is, once you get to the playoffs, half the teams in your league are not playing anymore. They either have a quarterback or they're not going to pick up waivers. So there's going to be opportunities throughout the playoffs to also pick up these guys. But let's identify now let's just do your number 1. We're going to each pick 1 quarterback and tight end. Who is your ideal quarterback streamer in Week 15?
The guy I would probably stream is, I'd take a shot on Aaron Rodgers at Jacksonville. I know Aaron Rodgers just has not had a good year, but he has had moments, and Jacksonville is very vulnerable to the pass. So that would be my top guy out of the streamers I saw. Now, a guy I would consider sitting for Rodgers would be like Sam Darnold against Chicago, or CJ Stroud. To tell you the truth, I would, at this point, I don't even know why 90% of people are still hanging on to CJ Stroud. He hasn't really done anything. He hasn't really done anything since Week 6. He's had 1 3-touchdown game, and he's had a couple of 300-yard games, but those were back in Week 4 and 5. He hasn't had 20 points in a game since Week 5 or Week 6. So that's a guy I would consider benching any of these weeks personally. Yeah,
I'm going to say my number 1 would be Justin Herbert. That Tampa Bay matchup at home is ideal. And honestly, that really, to me, is the guy that, if you're in a 10-team league, is probably somewhat available. Honestly, I wouldn't know because I have him in all those leagues. I've been waiting for the playoff run for that, but he's available in about a third of leagues right now. And if you're looking for a deeper name, I'm not going to go any further than Jameis Winston. When I tell, those 2 guys, those number 1 and 2 guys are the ones that we really identified early. But also, just because we saw this last year with Joe Flacco, Like Flacco did the same exact thing last year with the Browns. He was an absolutely winner down the stretch. Winston could do the same thing. Stefanski has realized that Chubb does not look right. If you watch the games, they cannot run the football. Chubb does not have the boot burst he usually has. They have to lean on the pass. And to be honest with you, they have the skill position players. They have Judy and Tillman, and Elijah Moore has looked decent, and also David Njoku. Like, they have the weapons to make it work. And honestly, they almost win these games. I mean, like, it's not like the Browns right now are losing to bad teams. They're beating the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're taking the Broncos, who are a playoff team, to the wire. Like, they're beating the Ravens.
They beat the Ravens, right?
What are we talking about here? Like, it's absolutely insane what's going on. And so,
look at who Winston is doing it with. Cedric Tillman, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, guys that have been written off in fantasy are now absolute studs.
Yeah. And so, like, that's why those two are really the ones that I'm identifying. Like, Herbert's really the guy. I like him at home. I like the spot. I like the dome. I like the Tampa Bay Bucs matchup. That's the one I'm going to go with. On the tight end side, what do you got for your Week 15 streamer?
I want to say one thing about Herbert, because I know he's still owned in 83% of leagues. But if you're really high on him, and if you're really high on him in Week 5, keep your eyes open, because I would not be surprised to see a few drops before Week 14. But let's get the tight ends. So my Week 15 stream is Jake Ferguson against Carolina, who's the best defense to play tight ends against. He's been out for a few weeks. I think Cooper Rush will be trying to use him, because outside of CeeDee Lamb, the wide receivers don't really scare anybody. I know Jalen Tolbert is talented and he can break a long one every now and then, but he just doesn't seem to be consistent or volume based. So, I mean, for me, I would be looking at Jake Ferguson against Carolina.
And do you have a sit for Week 15?
Honestly, I'm not hesitant to think about sitting Sam Laporta against Buffalo. Laporta just hasn't been very volume-based at all this year. He's been really touchdown dependent. If you want to roll those dice, go ahead. I mean, to me, it's kind of a toss-up. But another guy that's been very disappointing, and it's in the same game, Dalton Kincaid is another guy. If you even are still holding on to him, I would definitely sit him for Jake Ferguson. Detroit is the worst defense for tight ends. So, those are both the guys in that game I would consider sitting for Ferguson, or even Will Dissly.
Yeah, and my guy was Dissly. Dissly, that Tampa Bay matchup is absolutely great. When you're looking at our home road split tool, this is a really good time of year. The data is very strong now because it's a lot of 2024, because we do a rolling 18. And you're looking at this data and you're realizing that the Chargers as a whole play a lot better at home. And so, that's why I'm excited to play. And by the way, the matchup is absolutely great when you're looking at tight ends versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You're looking at some notable guys over the last few weeks. I mean, Tommy Tremble, 5 for 77. What are we even talking about here? Tommy Tremble, 5 for 77, insane. George Kittle, 3 for 57 and 1. Travis Kelce, 14 for 100 against the Bucs. And listen, I also want the offense. I want to know that the other team is good on offense. I do want the opportunity for a shootout. And I know the Bucs can move the football, and I do like that matchup. So Will Dissly is probably my top streamer for Week 15. I like the Dalton Kincaid call. Could I ask you this, though? There's two guys that are hot right now that actually have really tough matchups. One is Mark Andrews. Baltimore has – and let me just pull it up really quick. Sorry. I should have had it ready. Baltimore is playing against the Giants, but the Giants are whatever. They're kind of a dumpster fire on the road. And then the Dolphins as well have Houston, and Houston has been kind of tough against tight ends.
You just identified one of my Week 16 sits, Mark Andrews.
The Giants, surprisingly, are 32nd least amount of fantasy points allowed. How is that even possible? The Giants allowed the second fewest fantasy points to tight ends this season. I don't know what to make of that. That's weird. When I read it, I was like, because I have the analysis up, but it doesn't tell me the teams. It just tells me how good the matchup is, and like I have it highlighted. And I'm like, the Giants? That can't be right. Well, apparently it is. Giants are really tough against tight ends. So, but
they're
yeah,
actually. They're so lame on offense. You kind of miss that they're actually a decent defense. I mean, they're near the top of the league in sacks. They don't turn the ball over a lot, but they can cover, right? You know, they let Xavier McKinney walk, so you know there went a few interceptions out the door. But they're actually a decent defense, right?
Yeah, Zach Ertz, 1 for 5. Pat Freiermuth, 2 for 19. Cade Otton, 1 for 30. Now, like Sanders had 2 catches for 8 yards, but he found the end zone, which is great, but he only had 2 catches for 8 yards. And then Luke Shoemaker had 5 for 33, which is decent in PPR, I guess, but that's interesting. I don't think a lot of people are going to be sitting Mark Andrews, sitting Jonnu Smith in their tougher matchups, but to be honest with you, like this is the kind of time of year where if you're a 6 seed and you're playing against a much better team, like you honestly need to take a shot. Honestly, I'd be okay with taking a shot on Disley, who has a much better matchup. So I know it's a reach, but at the same time, you got to evaluate your team sometimes. And if you need that moonshot, like a Winston type, you know, that's kind of maybe what the Disley could be. We've seen it a couple weeks ago when he played against, I believe it was the Cincinnati Bengals where he had the big game. But let's jump down to week 16. 16, what do you got for us for the quarterbacks?
Real quick, you made a great point about if I'm looking for a streamer, I want a guy in a game where they're going to have to throw the ball a ton for a quarterback and a tight end. That's just a great point, and I think it needs to be said again. So my streamer for week 16, I'll give you 2 because the first one is Jake Ferguson again against Tampa Bay. Right, you know, all the points you made about Will Disley, they certainly apply to Jake Ferguson against Tampa Bay as well. And another guy I like in Week 16 is Dalton Schultz against Kansas City. Kansas City's got a pretty good defense, but they've been the one area that they don't really seem to pay that as much attention to is the middle of the field, and that's where the tight end is, and they're the third best defense to play against the tight end. And I don't hate Pat Freiermuth against Baltimore.
Yeah, that was going to be mine. Pat Freiermuth. I think the only issue with Freiermuth is that the AFC North games, like, they just don't go as you think. They're always tough, and the stats almost don't even matter. It's kind of like that's why like I kind of like to stay away from those games. To be honest with you, the one guy I had was Dalton. Yeah, the one guy I had in here was Dalton Schultz against Kansas City. You know, they're on the road against the Chiefs. The Chiefs are just, if you're looking for a boom game, like this is the boom game that you usually get from tight ends. Like the Kansas City, we just saw what Brock Bowers did. And Bowers, listen, he's on a different level. But Dalton Schultz is coming off a very strong game against Jacksonville. And honestly, like Tank Dell, listen, Stroud's not playing great. I get that. He plays a lot better at home. He's going to be on the road at Kansas City. However, when the Chiefs put up points at home, what that leads to is prevent defense late in games, and then they check down to running backs and tight ends. And so I feel like Dalton Schultz will probably get a few catches just from that alone, playing a little bit of catch-up. Maybe not a blowout, but still trailing, have to throw a little bit more. Just from that alone, he's going to be a great PPR play. So I think Schultz will probably be the guy in week 16 I lean to. And then Will Disley again, too. Like I'm okay with Disley as well of those guys. But let's jump over to quarterbacks. Which one quarterback streamer in week 16 are you looking at?
Let me hang on just a sec.
I can give you mine.
Streamer for quarterback. I gotta sort my notes here. My week 16 quarterback. Jesus. My quarterback. I don't know. I'll tell you what. I like Russell Wilson against Baltimore, even though he didn't have a great game against them last time. Jameis Winston's got Cincinnati.
100%. That's got Jameis Winston all over.
I mean, that's a rocket right there. They're the third best. They're the third best matchup for quarterbacks. So those are two. Another one, Richardson's got Tennessee, and Tennessee you think is a tough defense, but they're ninth best for quarterbacks. So those three guys are guys I would consider starting over, say. Hang on. I would consider starting him over, say, Jared Goff against the Bears. You never know when the Lions are going to go into full run mode, right? You know, what you're hoping for with Goff is a highly efficient game. I would consider sitting Goff. I would consider
100%.
I would consider sitting Justin Herbert against Denver. And depending on how the next couple of weeks go, even guys like Brock Purdy against Miami, and in Miami, by the way, and Jordan Love against New Orleans. It's Love. It's just not the same Green Bay offense as it was last year. It's more based around Josh Jacobs, and that could very well be a game where Jacobs handles the load.
There's two names that stand out to me that are going to be impossible to sit, but alarming. You have Jaden Daniels going up against Philly.
Yeah.
And you have Lamar Jackson playing against Pittsburgh. And we have seen time and time again with Lamar, he has not performed great versus Pittsburgh. So obviously if you're in week 16, especially if you have a first round bye, you're a high powered team, you're probably not going to sit Lamar. And honestly, I don't think you could sit Lamar, and I don't even think you could sit Jaden Daniels against the Eagles either. But to be honest with you, Jameis Winston if you told me Jameis Winston outscores both of them against Cincinnati, I would not blink for a second. I wouldn't blink at all.
100%.
And I think their rushing ability allows them to be – and listen, we could probably just look up right now because I'm interested. Daniels had already played Philadelphia a few weeks ago. He had 191 yards and a touchdown and 18 yards rushing. Oh, yeah, man, so, that's tough. That's tough. That's a bad game. That's a bad game.
And your point earlier about division games not going according to script, those are two perfect examples. Baltimore and Pittsburgh, Philadelphia and Washington. These are teams that know each other, right? So it's more a chess match than, say, San Francisco and Miami. Even though that may be a bad example, since Mike McDaniel came from the Kyle Shanahan tree, right? Yeah,
I listen, Lamar, you're fine. I mean, listen, he's got enough of a floor. I'll throw for 200 yards, 50, maybe 40 to 50 yards rushing, and maybe get you a score. You can't sit Lamar. Jaden Daniels worries the shit out of me. I honestly got to admit, that's the game too, where I believe I want to say Jaden Daniels, is he at home at least? Yeah, he'll be at home. And this season, Daniels, let's see, he's been better on the road. What the hell, man? That's scary. 17.9 fantasy points at home, 21.8 on the road. He's at home against the Eagles. Good luck. Good luck with that. Honestly, my advice is that if you just want the high floor, 15 fantasy points, you're probably good just starting Daniels. But if you are a lower seed and you think you need juice, honestly, play Winston. I don't think there's a world where Jaden Daniels gets 30 points against the Eagles in that game. But man, talk about the terrible timing, huh? I guess those are the two names. Tua is another name that kind of comes up. The Miami Dolphins have the San Francisco 49ers that week.
Yeah.
At least they're home, though. They're home against the 49ers. I think I'm more confident in Tua at home. I wouldn't stress about it too much.
The thing about the 49ers is they've been getting their asses beat the last couple of weeks, but it's mostly been on the ground, right? Even against Seattle, where they lost that close game, they lost that game on a run by Geno Smith. Geno Smith for 221 yards, but he had no touchdowns. And the last couple of weeks, they've lost by, 28 and 25? But they've allowed less than 200 yards passing. That's the only hesitation I've got going against the 49ers. They've been getting killed off the ground.
Before we get into Week 17, let's address a question we have. Emily, I believe. Emil. It could be Emily. Not sure. Either way, glad to have you on. We appreciate you for jumping on. Obviously, a couple weeks ago, this question would have been outrageous. But Bryce Young has legitimately turned a corner. And we got to shout out Bryce Young because, honestly, he looks like a completely different player. The issue is Bryce Young is on the road against Philadelphia. Goff is at home against a banged-up Packers secondary. That already tells you my opinion. I am going to, without a doubt, go with Jared Goff here at home against the Packers with both Jair Alexander and another cornerback out. What's your thoughts here, though, Dave?
Yeah, this week I would stick with Goff. Now, if you were come to me with this question next week, I'd probably go with Bryce Young against Dallas. But I just don't like Carolina against Philadelphia. It's
on the road too. That's tough. That's a tough. Honestly, Bryce. I think. Listen, when the other loophole to this whole thing, and I know last week it wasn't exactly this, but Goff at home is always easy and smooth. Like, he's in the dome, and honestly, I would be curious because I believe this is just probably me speculating here, but let me just pull it up because I believe last year, and I just want to confirm this before I say it, and they played Green Bay. He went for 332 yards and 2 touchdowns last year against Green Bay at home. And the year before that, wow, they only won 15-9. Gross. All right, interesting. But he threw for 2 touchdowns. All right.
Yeah.
That's a weird game, 15-9. But whatever.
This year's Lions team's a little different. They don't really need Goff to win those games anymore. I mean, they've been using Montgomery and Gibbs just to nickel and dime teams to death, right? You sit there, you get pounded by Montgomery, all of a sudden Gibbs comes in and he's breaking off 30-yard runs. So, if the Packers can slow that down, then Goff's going to have to beat him. But, I still like Goff better than Bryce.
Yeah, I mean, the Packers have been a little better this year. I mean, they did a really good job against Miami last week. They shut down Devin and Chain. They shut down Christian McCaffrey. I know they were playing with Brandon Allen. I know that's a thing, but still, that's huge. And honestly, they're not the same Packers they were a few years ago where they were getting gashed all the time on the ground. So I think for me, it's more about Bryce Young playing against Philly on the road than it is anything. And that's why I'm going to lean Goff at home. So I think that's a safer bet, especially if you're trying to get into the playoffs. I think Goff offers you a safer bet here. But honestly, Bryce Young, great pickup, and he's doing fantastic. I got to call him out, shout him out, because he looks completely different. He looks amazing, actually. So it's great to see.
One of the tournaments I'm in with one of the other guys is our quarterbacks are now Russell Wilson and Bryce Young. We started with Dak Prescott and Aaron Rodgers, and we flipped the script. We had Trevor Lawrence for a week, but he got his brains beat in. So we've broken 2 quarterbacks. We're trying not to kill everybody, but we do need people. We do need bodies.
Dave meant to say a speedy recovery, Trevor. We hope you're okay. We do all right. Honestly, hope you're okay, buddy. We do appreciate it. Yeah. By the way, I just dropped CJ Stroud for Jameis Winston, so I hear you, man. Shit's getting weird this time of year. Honestly, just something about that game I saw on Monday night watching Winston. I go, I don't care. I just want it. I just want to go down with the ship. I want Winston to go 4 interceptions, 1 touchdown. I want to go down with that ship because I just feel like it's just going to be a wild ride. I'm not going to miss it.
When it comes to fantasy, I'm more Monty Python. It's like bring out your dead, right?
Yeah. All right, so let's get into Week 17. I'm going to let you pick. You want to do quarterbacks or tight ends first? Let me know what you got for Week 17.
Let's go with let's go with the Jesus. I hate when I do lists like this. Let's go starts for quarterbacks. I'm going to go a little bit deeper this time. I'm going to if I'm feeling I need a home run, I might take a shot on Derek Carr against the Raiders in New Orleans. Also, another one I like is Caleb Williams against Seattle. Caleb Williams has actually been doing pretty well. I know Matt Stiles doesn't want to hear this, but Caleb Williams has actually got like 140 yards rushing in the last 3 games. And as long as they're charging from behind, they're going to have to throw a ton. So I would put him in and hoping for that. And then another guy I might look at if I'm going really deep is Aiden O'Connell on the other side of the New Orleans game. Guys I might sit in their stead. A couple of guys, and both in the same game, right down the street. The San Francisco-Detroit game. I don't really care for Brock Purdy in that game. And that's a game where the Lions may just beat the pants off the 49ers on the ground. So I'm probably less likely to start Goff on the road in Santa Clara.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Goff on the road. Goff on the road's never been great. I think, and especially outdoors in December, not worth the risk in Week 17. I know this is it's funny. We just talked about it. I would say the guy that I'm actually kind of interested in is Bryce Young. Coming off this big game against Tampa, we just saw him do it for 298 rushing touchdown as well. The dynamic is starting to look really good for him. And that matchup could be, it's going to be important for Tampa Bay. They're going to have to keep winning. And I think that Tampa Bay will be at home in that game, and they could definitely put up points against Carolina. I do think that Bryce Young makes an interesting play there. That is a deeper name. And I think the problem, like we talked about Herbert a bunch, but like Herbert to me is, I don't know. On the road against New England, the matchup's good, but I don't want to play him traveling to the East Coast in New England in December. Just not feeling that matchup really for me. Derek Carr's matchup against the Raiders is very interesting to me, but the good thing with Derek Carr is nobody's going to pick him up. And I'm curious because it sounds like Chris Olave might make a return this season. And if Olave does come back, and by the way, he shouldn't. I think it's, unless the Saints are basically eliminated. But the point is, like, if Olave comes back with MVS kind of filling a little bit of that Shaheed role, and, really honestly, they have Kamara obviously out of the backfield, and Juwan Johnson's still there as the tight end. But the Raiders' offense is interesting to me because if the Raiders' offense plays like they did against the Chiefs, like that's just going to allow more, better offensive play around them. But even that game is a huge risk because the offenses aren't great. So I think the number one streamer for me probably would be Russell Wilson against the Chiefs. I just think that Russ against the Chiefs is probably the number one for me in Week 17. Listen, Patrick Mahomes is always going to do enough to force them to stay competitive in that game. And by the way, the Chiefs secondary, I don't know what the hell happened, but man, they have not looked good. Yeah. Just the Raiders, doing that against them is weird.
I don't know what's up with the Chiefs. The last couple of years, they've actually just looked bored by the regular season. It's like, wake me up when the playoffs start. I'll do enough to get there, but it seems like they're at a point where they're just playing to their competition. I mean, the Raiders had no business being in that game last week, but there they were, and they had a chance to win it, and then they did the Raider thing.
The other thing with the Chiefs, they're good at stuff. They're good.
They did exactly what you need to do against the Chiefs and hold on to the ball until the game is almost over. I don't know what the center was doing with the ball.
I don't know.
So anyway,
but if you just look at the last few weeks of the Chiefs, it's been pretty much everybody's getting 3 straight games of 260 yards passing from the top quarterback. They have allowed 2 touchdowns in the last 4 out of 6 games. And it's not like they're playing great competition. They played the Raiders twice, the Bucs without Mike Evans, sorry. Then they played Denver and Buffalo, of course, and then Carolina. That's not really the greatest. I mean, other than Josh Allen, there's nobody in it. Listen, Bo Nix is playing extremely well, 2-15-2. Listen, I think Russ and that's probably the guy I would target. They're playing at home. Of course, you have to watch for Pittsburgh as well. Always could be a bad weather game too, but I think that's it. All right, let's get into tight ends really quick for Week 17. What's your thoughts here?
Okay, so my tight end Week 17 stream is Zach Ertz against Atlanta. A couple of other guys. I'm all over Ertz. I think he's getting enough targets to not even be touchdown dependent. I think in the game against Atlanta and Washington, they're probably going to need him. A couple of other guys I like against lesser pass defenses is Pat Freiermuth against Kansas City. You already brought up the Russell Wilson there. And Dalton Schultz against Baltimore. Now, guys I would consider sitting, well, first of all, if you still have Kyle Pitts, I don't think you need to worry about Week 17. Dalton Kincaid's another guy that has just sunk his teams. But guys that actually are that have a pulse, the one guy I would consider sitting would be Evan Ingram against Tennessee.
There's a lot of guys. Week 17. So you got Jacksonville, Buffalo. Buffalo and Detroit, I believe, are Buffalo's playing against the Jets, which is whatever. Detroit has Miami. No, I'm sorry, that's not true at all. Detroit has San Francisco, my apologies, on the road. And Kittle and Sam Laporta both have really tough matchups. You got Fred Warner on one side. Now, granted, let's see what Detroit – I mean, listen, Detroit is dealing with unprecedented injuries. Like, their defense, their front seven is, like, non-existent at this point. I think, like, 6 of their top 10 snap guys are now out for that team. So that's not good. And so, like, honestly, if you even look at the Ravens, Baltimore has got Houston, and Houston's been really tough against tight ends this season on the road with Mark Andrews. Like, I think Pat Freiermuth is my number one guy. I think Pat Freiermuth might be a top 5 tight end. Kansas City just gets crushed by tight ends, and Freiermuth is like the perfect fit. And honestly, I think if I'm going to combine 2 guys, I think I'm going to go Will Dissly and I'm going to go Pat Freiermuth. If I can get those 2 guys on my team, I can play Dissly in Week 15. Dissly's got a great matchup against Tampa Bay at home, and then the next 2 weeks I got Freiermuth back-to-back. Like, that's a really streamable duo that you could probably get pretty cheap off the wire for the most part. And the other one, the name I'll bring up again is just Juwan Johnson, mostly because he's universally unowned. And I think the underrated aspect of this is going to be the Taysom Hill injury. He's got the Raiders at home, and the Raiders are a beatable defense for tight ends. And honestly, I think he's going to be playing a bunch down the stretch, especially with the injuries to the receiving core with no Taysom Hill. So he's just the guy that if you can't get – like Freiermuth, by the way, is owned in over 50% of leagues. You know, guys like we talked about too, Dalton Schultz, Tucker Kraft is a really good player. These guys are kind of owned a little bit more. And if you're in a 12-team league, in a pretty sharp league, these guys might be gone. So Juwan Johnson's just that name. I feel like that is pretty much you can get anywhere. That might be a guy that can help you win a fantasy title.
Yeah, he's definitely. Yeah, I like Juwan Johnson. If I've got a spot available on my bench and I've got a tight end I'm not super confident in, Juwan Johnson's just the perfect kind of guy that I would throw a dart at, right? You know, because your point that the Saints are completely decimated in the receiving core. And there is a possibility that coin flip if Olave comes back for the rest of the year. So a guy like Juwan Johnson's a perfect dart throw in a deep league.
Yeah, the other name, I think I'm curious to see if he comes back, but I want to look at Sanders from the Carolina Panthers. By the way, he was quietly playing super well before he went out with that injury. I don't think he is he's practicing again. Okay. He's back at practice. And I just want to pull this up because he was doing pretty well. So, like, before his injury, he had 5 for 49, 6 for 61, 1 for 7, which is done, but then 4 for 87 in 4 of the previous few games. Then he had a bad game against the Giants, but he did get a touchdown, which he had 6.8 points. So, I mean, listen, like there was something going on. And then he was playing against Kansas City in that game. He had 3 catches for 49 yards, then he hurt his neck. But it sounds like he's practicing again. And his schedule in the playoffs isn't great, but in week 17, he has that really good matchup against Tampa Bay. So just a guy that I would be – honestly, I'd probably put him – if he's back playing again, I might put him ahead of Juwan Johnson as like the deepest dart throw because no one's going to have Sanders either in most of your 10 to 12 team leagues.
No, definitely not 10-team leagues. But yeah, no, that's a great name to put out there for the stretch run to the championship.
Yeah. And Tyler, which are you asking Juwan Johnson or Otten for what week? Are you asking for this week? Are you asking, by the way, Tyler, always a pleasure. Love seeing you. We just need to know, is this a start sit for this week? Or are you asking for like a stash? Technically, today's show is must have streamers for the, So I think it's probably this week. But
maybe he's asking about the whole stretch, right? I'm probably still going with Otten, but let me put it this way. Otten's definitely the kind of tight end I would back up Juwan Johnson with. Definitely to see if he still is not as active as he was when Mike Evans was out. Because, the last couple of games with Evans back, he's been a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, that's a huge one, right? Because Mike Evans came back and all of a sudden he kind of went back to his normal role as like this kind of, obviously there's no Chris Godwin, but Sterling Shepard has demanded some targets too. So this week and rest of season for both. And listen, I think in my opinion, so Otten doesn't have a great playoff schedule. He does have a great week 17 against Carolina. But before that, his schedule is the Chargers on the road and then Dallas on the road. And neither of those defenses are really great for tight ends this season. So, honestly, I'd rather play Will Dissly ahead of Otten in the first 2 weeks of the playoffs. I'd rather play guys like, not Freiermuth in week 15, but week 16 I'd play Freiermuth. But the point is, I think for the whole, Juwan Johnson is more of like a speculative ad. Because I can't, honestly, I have no idea. He should be on, I think it's just a name to keep in the back of your mind. And honestly, Juwan Johnson's playoff schedule is actually pretty good in week 16 and 17. But in week 14, they have the Giants on the road. And we just talked about the Giants being really good against tight ends. So I think for this week, I'm going to stick with Otten versus the Raiders this week at home. I think that's a slam dunk. And I think I'm going to go Otten anyway season long. But if you have the roster spot, stash him.
And we didn't really talk about Otten as a possible sit. But, that to me, that's definitely the kind of guy I would look to back up just in case. You want
100%.
If you want to take a speculative ad to augment Cade Otten, I'd say 100% do it.
Yeah, Kincaid, another guy, not really caring for it. Mark Andrews has a brutal playoff schedule. Week 16, he has a decent matchup, but other than that, Jonnu Smith has a really tough playoff schedule, but he's just been a different level. Yeah. And by the way they use him, I almost don't even care about the matchup because the way that
I've been waiting for somebody to use Jonnu Smith like that. Arthur Smith showed it in flashes last year, but
yeah. I mean, listen, if you're a Tyreek Hill and Waddle owner, it drives you freaking crazy. But listen, whatever, man. I mean, at some point, and listen, there's going to be a time. Miami's one of those teams where, they can go off at any time. So, their playoff schedule at Houston in a dome. I know Tua plays at home, but that's a game that could go off because Stroud's going to play better at home against Miami. You got San Francisco at home. Both good offenses could definitely go off. But then on the road at Cleveland in week 17, I don't know if I'm excited to play Tua after what we see from him, but we'll see. But overall, I hope the show was very helpful today, and I really appreciate you, Dave, for jumping on. And honestly, tell the people where they can find you, find your content, everywhere you write your stuff.
Yeah, well, this is pretty much the place. I I'm on Twitter at Cruiser128. Also the same at Blue Sky. My articles are on Razzball every week during the season. I do articles about the win-loss players splits database and the home road players splits database that we have for free on our site. Yeah, they're great, and in concert with the other tools we have, it's just a lot of good information.
Is there any good nuggets from your article this week, do you think? Like, is there anybody with a good home or road split that stood out to you this week the most?
You know, it's funny because I'm about halfway through it right now. I took a break from it to prepare for this. I started writing a start for 2 players, and it wound up being sits for both. I started making my case. And as I was making my case, I'm going, well, you know what? This just doesn't sound right to me. So I said, okay, because I was trying to convince myself that maybe Kirk Cousins could come take off the Clark Kent uniform and show up as Superman against his old Minnesota team. But the way the Falcons have been playing lately, I just can't buy it. So one of the Falcons receivers is going to be a sit for me this week.
All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah. We don't want to spoil it too much. Let the people read it on razzball.com where you can find all of Dave's great articles. And by the way, Dave, I didn't ask you this before the show. I have a personal question to ask you, my friend.
Sure.
All right. So I am in a win or go home week 14 matchup this week. I have accumulated a pretty decent lineup. However, I have no idea who to start and sit, so I'm curious to get your thoughts.
Okay.
My stud is Alvin Kamara. It's 2 wide receiver, 2 running back, flex, half PPR.
Okay.
My one auto start is Alvin Kamara.
Sure.
The rest of my team is Tyrone Tracy. I have Isaiah Guerrero, Kenneth Walker. Then my receivers are CeeDee Lamb, Deebo Samuel, Juwan Jennings, Cooper Kupp, Jerry Jeudy.
Tough. I'll tell you the way that the Browns are playing right now. Jerry Jeudy was like a 16th round pick for me in Scott Fishbowl, and now he's an auto start. Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm gonna go with Jeudy. It's Cooper Kupp just has not been doing much lately. It's been Puka Nakua's show, right?
I have Kupp, Walker, and Lamb on my bench right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And Deebo Samuel on my bench. That's what I have on my bench.
The only person that you just mentioned that I might think about starting is Lamb, but I don't blame you for having him there.
Yeah, because I have Tracy and Guerrero in there right now. And I also have Jennings at home against Chicago. And I also have Jerry Jeudy in my lineup.
Yeah.
And one guy, yeah.
100%. I could totally go that way too. I mean, let me put it this way. I have some teams where I have Kupp and Deebo, and I don't have as good of alternatives as you have. If I have Jeudy and Kupp and Deebo, I'm starting Jeudy over either of the other two. I mean, Deebo the 49ers have been meat. Deebo hasn't done much for weeks. Kupp, just like I said, Kupp hasn't been the same since Nakua came back. So, yeah, 100% the way you're going. I like it.
What a world. What a world. Honestly, when I set my lineup and I texted you guys, I was like, man, I don't feel like this is right. I can't have Cooper Kupp, Kenneth Walker, CeeDee Lamb, Deebo Samuel all on my bench, right? Like, that's not a thing. And then I'm like, I guess maybe it's a thing. So
yeah,
I hate it.
There's certain cases where you look at a guy and you go, how am I going to feel if this guy goes off? But the problem with the guys you're talking about is you've been waiting for them to go off for so long, you wonder if they're ever going to do it. And it gets to a point where you say, okay, you know what? Screw this. They can go off on my bench because they're costing me points every week.
Yeah, you know what? Really, when it comes down to it, is like I've always viewed it as the guys like Lamb with Cooper Rush are now they fall in line with the guys like Judy. And instead of Lamb being an auto start no matter what, you're like, all right, now the matchups matter. Where he's playing, who he's playing matters. And like at home versus the Bengals kind of seems like a good matchup though. And so it does seem like to me like he should be in my lineup. But like my gut feeling is simple. Like when I look at Juwan Jennings, for example, Chicago is a good defense, but the San Francisco 49ers are going to be at home and they're going to have to win this game. And so like Jennings, by the way, still figured out a way to put up some points in that Blizzard game, and he seems to be the go-to guy for Purdy. So, you know, like there's been multiple games against the Bears where if you look at how they play against wide receivers, they are tough against receivers, but they always do allow somebody to perform. I mean, you look at Terry McLaurin, you know, guys like that. You also have Christian Watson a few months ago. Jordan Addison had a big game against them. So it's not like it's far-fetched. But it's still tough to sit CeeDee Lamb at home against the Bengals. So,
the thing with Lamb right now is he could have 10 catches, but he could also have like 79 yards, right?
Right, yeah.
You know, I mean, it's 17.9 points is all right. But, you know, I'll take the guy that if he gets 10 catches, he gets like 120 yards or 140 yards and maybe a touchdown. You know, they're just not letting Cooper Rush have the time to, you know, formulate plays. He just doesn't have the processing. He doesn't have the processing skill of a Dak Prescott or a Brock Purdy. So yeah, I'm fine starting Jennings over CeeDee Lamb.
And the issue is that like CeeDee Lamb's shoulder, and he got hurt, and he didn't play basically the second half last week. And listen, I think if it's full PPR, Lamb kind of offers you a different floor where you can trust that 8 catches for 60 yards to still get you borderline wide receiver 1 numbers. And you're like, all right, I'm good with that. In half PPR, it changes the whole complexity of it.
Half PPR, the yardage are much more important.
Yeah. So I hear you. And the other thing too is like, it's the options. Like Isaiah Guerrero, I know it's like he just got off. It's a huge risk. But, like, the one way you kill Chicago is on the ground. Like, they are very vulnerable against ground games. And, I don't know. I just have something
plus, give me a guy that's relatively fresh in week 14. I mean, Isaac Guerrendo's been on the team the whole year. But, you know, what's he got, 30 or 40 carries?
Yeah, but also, you know what the other crazy part is? Like, he's an absolute freak athlete. Like he was the number one against Player Profiler rated him as the number 1 Spark Score athlete in their analysis for 2024. Like he is an absolute monster. Like, and so when they talked about him back in April, Kyle Shanahan compared him to Elijah Mitchell. And listen, Mitchell couldn't stay healthy, but boy, did he succeed in this offense. And we have seen, and the one thing I like, Shanahan is very transparent in the sense of like, when he identifies a guy that he likes, he rides with him. And we saw this over time, but like Trey Sermon was supposed to be the guy, and Elijah Mitchell was just better. And then week 1 comes around and boom, it's Mitchell. And Mitchell is the guy he rides with. And like, that's what he does. So
it's the mystery of Kyle Shanahan, because if he finds a trait in a player that he doesn't like, guy's dead to him.
Oh yeah, ask Trey Lance. Like, see you later. Like right out the door. Yeah. And so and that's like this is just it gets to a point where it's matchup based. You're right, the fresh legs matter. But to be honest with you, the other thing that's going to be telling is like that they haven't made any moves yet to get a running back. I mean, they got Keyshawn Vaughn.
They did sign a couple of guys, but I don't think there's any threat there, right? And
who are the guys they signed?
You don't bring a guy in off the street and he comes walking in and you're giving him 20 carries. So they signed Israel Abanikanda from the Jets.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And they also signed Keyshawn Vaughn. But these are guys that, they've been in systems for a couple of years or more and they haven't done anything. So to think that those guys are going to walk into a team that was, a few minutes from winning the world championship last year and all of a sudden dominate touches. It's not going to happen unless something happens to Garendo. I think they're going to have to step over Patrick Taylor first.
Yeah. Well, there's certain loopholes to that. Like Kareem Hunt was a good example where he had history with the team and he came in and he leapfrogged the younger guys. So I understand that there would be if there was like if a guy like, for example, Matt Breida was signed or or a better name would probably be Raheem Mostert was available. I'd be a little more concerned.
The thing with Kareem Hunt is he already knew the system, the team knew him, and he's talented. The problem with Kareem Hunt has never been talent. The problem with Kareem Hunt has been Kareem Hunt. He's a bit of a knucklehead, and he does some odd things. So that's probably why he was gone from Kansas City to begin with.
Well, no, he got caught on video hitting somebody, and they released him. Like the NFL and especially us all have short-term memories. Like he was kicked out of Chiefs, not because of play, because he got caught on camera doing something that was not good. And the Browns scooped him up and they just kind of wrote it out. But the Chiefs had to let go, and obviously people can redeem themselves and they can make up for it. But that's why it's like, it was messed up what happened. So
the Browns are the island of misfit toys, right? If it's not Kareem Hunt, it's Deshaun Watson. No crime is too great.
Yeah, it was like the Bengals for a while. The Cowboys took a turn, and now it's like the Browns. But listen, Hey, listen. You know what, Cleveland? Honestly, Deshaun Watson's contract. You get everything you deserve, I guess, sometimes. Like, honestly, like, you're going to have to deal with that for 2 more. I still can't believe he has 2 more years on his contract. It's like, oh my God.
And they keep pushing it back. So, if they're not careful, they're going to wind up with the football version of Bobby Bonilla.
I love that call. By the way, I will say this. Hey, listen, there is light at the end. Look at the Denver Broncos with Russ. Hey, they got rid of Russ. They took all that dead cap. They found Bo Nix. And listen, honestly, I think Jameis Winston, they should give him a chance next year. Let him be the starter. They could get him super cheap, probably for like $10 million to be the starter for the season. Something, give him a little bit of a pay increase. And honestly, like the way he's looked, the only thing they got to fix is maybe the pick sixes a little. Calm down just a little bit, a little less.
I can tell you this. I think they could go 9-8 or 8-9 with Jameis. I don't think they can do that with Deshaun Watson.
Well, I think what the Browns defense would have to play at the level they did last year. Last year, they were like really good. If you have like a top 10 defense and Nick Chubb returns to form, and then you can use Jameis Winston when you need him, like they could probably get 10 wins on that team.
But the guy that got them to the playoffs late in the year, the guy that kept them on course was Joe Flacco. It wasn't Deshaun Watson.
The best. Oh, yeah. Deshaun Watson is not – no, he's not. No. Like, it's just – you watch – it was painful to watch. Like, just the level – by the way, there's certain teams who do not do right by their quarterback. They don't have the talent in the receiving core. They don't have the talent on the offensive line. They have bad schemes, coaching changes. The Browns had none of that. The Browns have a good offensive line. By the way, could arguably be a top 5 offensive line. They have a bunch of skill position players. They had Amari Cooper at the time, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, David Njoku. They had, all the talent around him. And by the way, Kevin Stefanski's been there for years, and he knows he's an offensive-minded head coach. There is no excuse for why Deshaun Watson. By the way, and listen, Deshaun Watson, there's multiple things going on. He had the shoulder injury. Then he had the whole scandal with his the massage thing. Mentally, physically, he could just be done. And honestly, I don't know if he ever was an elite processor, but in Houston, he was just a better player. And the one thing I would say is, like, maybe the one guy that could help him is Bill O'Brien. Get Bill O'Brien back together with him somewhere, and maybe they can kind of rekindle some of the stuff, but it just doesn't seem like he's the same guy anymore. Yeah, well, I'm just saying, man, like, it's just some familiarity would be good for him. Like, maybe the system, the scheme, the same thing. Maybe even Tim Kelly, his old OC, who's actually had some success. Maybe that. I don't know. I think he froze up. But anyway.
Yeah.
I think we lost you. There we go. We got you back. I think the stream is like,
couldn't
guys,
tell if it was me that froze up or you that froze up.
I don't know. It could be both. I don't know at this point, but
yeah,
whatever.
Yeah. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
It's time. All right, that's all we got today, folks. Dave Cruz. By the way, Dave, we should do this more often where we just kind of rant at the end of the podcast. It's a lot of fun just to talk normal ball, less structure, a little more fun. You know what? I think that's the new format going forward. But I want to thank Dave Cruz for being on the show again. Honestly, go follow him at Cruiser128. Make sure you go follow all the guys at Razzball. And go check out all their great content they're doing on Razzball.com. Make sure you subscribe to the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel and also go to IG and TikTok. And by the way, join us this Sunday live for 2 hours before kickoff. We're going to be a 2-hour live start sit show only on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us again, folks. We are out of here.